This episode has been brought to you by My Extraordinary Productions. Can't find the right actors? We can cast your project with you. Click the link in the description to learn more. Hi everyone, so today we are talking about casting once again, and this time we are on the topic of color-conscious casting versus color-blind casting. The first question is, which one's better? And the answer is that it depends how they're utilized. If we are speaking purely in averages, you probably are going to be safer going with color-conscious casting than color-blind casting because it's very easy for color-blind casting to go wrong. But that's not to say that color-blind casting is useless. Color-blind casting actually has its place and can do some good. So let's actually give ourselves a definition of both of these things first. Color-blind casting is when you totally disregard an actor's race and ethnicity, whereas color-conscious casting actually takes those things into account. Color-blind casting can actually work very well if a story has no mentions of race whatsoever, especially if that story takes place in the present day in a major metropolitan area. This is because, under these circumstances, you don't really have to explain why this teacher is Asian. You don't really have to explain why this accountant is Latinx. People of all races exist in all sorts of positions. Another place you may see a form of colorblind casting is when you're working with community theater. There are some theaters that cater specifically to Asian people, and they will do the all-Asian production of whatever the show is. Or they cater specifically to black people, so they do the all-black production of whatever the show is. Colorblind casting may be a way to go if you want a BIPOC actor to be in a role they may not ordinarily be seen in, where there's no real reason why this actor can't be in that role, especially when this is all about the human condition. So when is it inappropriate to do colorblind casting? When you're clearly virtue signaling for marketing purposes. That's kind of tacky. One example of this is the one black character from Frozen 2, which black people exist, but they establish in that universe that everyone is white. So why did they make him black? Another instance where colorblind casting is misused is when the story in question does rely heavily on race. For example, you can't cast a white woman to play Harriet Tubman. You can't. I mean, you can, but I wouldn't recommend it. Another area where colorblind casting goes awry is when you ignore history, you ignore society, you ignore facts for your story, and you create something that would never happen. You can't have a Mexican in medieval France. Why? Because Mexico didn't exist yet. Another place where colorblind casting often is viewed poorly is when someone decides to include actors of color and then they put them in really horribly stereotypical situations, like a watermelon eating contest. Finally, colorblind casting is often looked down upon when you cast a white actor in the role of a person of color, but then you give that white actor a line like, "My great-grandmother was Native American." It's not that that's impossible, it's that it's not the same experience. Here are some questions you should ask yourself before going the colorblind casting route. Does this character have to be white? Can I hire a BIPOC actor for this role? If I change the race, does that change the story? If so, how? The good thing about colorblind casting is that we in the United States have a habit of defaulting to white whenever a character has no real identifying characteristics. So asking these questions is a way of at least checking what our biases are. Now, if you're really unsure if you're doing the right thing by going the colorblind casting route, you can always find an actual member of that particular race and ask them for their opinion. I mean, you should probably be friends first, but it is an option. So what makes color-conscious casting different? Well, color-conscious casting is when you take the actor's race and ethnicity into consideration. Color-conscious casting makes sense when you have a story that is set in a specific time period, or you have certain societal rules that you are trying to present. Color-conscious casting also makes sense when you actually do have an explanation for what this person would be doing in this area. Now, color-conscious casting seems like the better option, and it usually is. However, things go awry when people don't actually plan for it. Someone decides to hire a black actor, a Latinx actor, an Asian actor, whatever, for this specific role, and then they don't have the script line up with what this actor is doing. One question someone may ask is, can you do both at the same time? Well, can you be unaware of race while also being completely aware of race? Can you have your eyes closed while also having your eyes open? This is still having an eye open. When you try to do both at the same time, you confuse your audience and they get really annoyed. Are we saying race doesn't matter at all, or are we saying that race is very important? Which way are we going with this? Now, can color blind casting become color conscious casting? Well, by definition, no, and action is whatever that action is. However, if the real question is, can you do colorblind casting for season 1, keep all the same actors for season 2, but then start incorporating elements of their heritage, of their physical attributes, of their culture and home life and all those things into those later episodes? Totally. Happens all the time. Another question you may ask is, can color conscious casting become color blind casting? Well, once again, you either do the thing or you don't do the thing. It's really hard to be right in the middle of those two actions. But if what you're asking is, can an actor's race be considered for season 1 and then people kind of forget about it by season 3? I'm sure it happens, I just can't think of any examples. Now, pun totally not intended, but hopefully appreciated. Sometimes with color conscious casting, color blind casting, you enter a gray area. And one of these gray areas is the fantasy world. So, the fantasy world. If you have a fantasy world that isn't Earth, can you do colorblind casting? Sometimes. Let's take the show Avatar: The Last Airbender. Just by looking at some of the art from the show, you can tell that this show is very heavily inspired by Asian cultures. You kind of have to hire Asian actors for these particular roles. However, there are fantasy worlds where people just throw people of all races into all positions, and in that case, you can go the color blind route instead of the color conscious route. Now, another gray area is having an all-white production of any show that traditionally hires BIPOC actors. I know some people are wondering, why is it okay for black people to do The Wizard of Oz, but it's not okay for white people to do The Wiz? They are the same exact story. It's just that The Wiz is the black version of The Wizard of Oz. Well, thing number one is, if you want to do that story, you already have the white person option right there. But let's ignore that. Quite simply, the reason why it's not okay for a white cast to do The Wiz is because it's a form of cultural appropriation. So why is it okay for a black cast to do The Wizard of Oz? Well, it's a power dynamic thing. There's a difference between having something thrust upon you and going along with it, and having something that's just yours and someone taking it from you. Speaking of Avatar and the fantasy world in general, another gray area is voiceover. In the voiceover world, well, you never actually see the actor. So you don't have to hire a basketball player, you don't have to hire someone who can actually fly a plane, you don't have to hire someone who's 6'6" or 5'3". You could hire pretty much anyone to do any role, and a lot of people just found it easier to work with the same 5 actors for their entire cast than to try to find 30, 40 actors for every single bit part. So race kind of became a part of that. You don't have to be black to voice Dr. Hibbert. You don't have to be Indian to voice Apu. Today, though, we see it differently. Thing number one is just, it's kind of problematic to have a white person doing an impression of a minority group, getting paid for that impression of that minority group, and then for that minority group to not get anything out of it, which includes a say in their own portrayal. The other thing is that when you hire a member of that specific minority group to voice this specific character, that particular actor is going to have more background knowledge, is going to be able to approach this performance with more nuance, and it's going to be a more authentic performance. Hopefully this video helps you make a few of your own casting decisions. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Follow me on social media. If you have a question, leave a comment, and I will see you all next time.